Good day, esteemed colleagues. I think it's time to start. Those who want to join us, please, you're welcome. I think it's going to be very interesting. Okay, let's start. So I see all the speakers are here. So our today's session will be devoted to the issues how to provide sustainable development of mining industry in Kazakhstan, and what are the financial, investment, and ESG aspects of all these. How can it impact the development of the sector, and how can we attract money for this development? I think it's going to have very interesting presentations today. My name is Viktor Kovalenko. I'll be the moderator of the session, and I'll follow the agenda and the timelines of the sessions. And esteemed speakers, please follow the timelines. Maybe I'll give a sign for you that you need to stop or to continue your presentation. So esteemed guests, if you have any questions, please, you're welcome. Either you can send them to the chat, because we're going to collect all the questions and the organizers will moderate it, and I'll pronounce these questions in the very end. Maybe we'll have the Q&A session if we have time. And please use the channel for the translation. There is a button with a globe in the bottom of the screen, and please choose the language, either English or Russian, that you will be able to follow us. So about this session, in the very beginning, I want to say why we're going to discuss this today, why we're talking about this development of mining sector in Kazakhstan, why we are talking about ESG aspects. The main message that I would like to mention here, that if we leave alone all the factors like reputation and environmental safety, if we follow the global trends, and if we are looking and care about the coming generations and about our world, then we may say that the capital markets, financial companies, and banks are now focused on the ESG factors when they make the decisions where to invest and how to invest. If we're talking about this mining sector, mining industries, and how to finance the players and companies of this sector. We also may speak about why financial companies, market of capitals, and banks are so attentive to these factors now. Again, the main message here, that ESG, it's not a kind of revolution. It's not something to come out of nowhere, out of space. We are talking about risks and money. ESG, as our company, Ernst & Young company, ESG, this is how the capital markets and investment community perceive risk grade of financing this company or that company or the industry in terms of non-financial factors and risks. The risks and factors that can prevent the company to remain profitable, to work in a long-term perspective, and to be valuable to the general community and to the stakeholders. So if we're talking about some kind of bank and a mining company, where are ESG risks? If something may happen in a company in the area of environment, some kind of emissions or illegal wastes, and the state regulating body will come and will fine the company. They will take the charges. It means it will be reflected on the financial position of the company. It means that it is not longer solvent enough. This is the risk of a bank. That's why they're so attentive to ESG company. That's maybe a rather rude example, but thus I want to illustrate why banks and financial sector look at this, because ESG and risk can impact the financial statement and investment attractiveness of the company. That is why we're going to talk about this today. We'll discuss these matters. And also we'll speak what the companies and industries can do to be attractive for the investors to remain attractive. And in the very end of my discussion, I think we'll do a kind of summary. We conclude what to do in this sector to remain attractive the investments and what to do to remain, quite sustainable in terms of ESG aspects. Now I want to give the floor to Arman Bilgazin. He is the partner of Holland Lomax company, and he will speak about the impact of the new environmental code of Kazakhstan on the mining and geological industry. Good day. Thank you, Victor. My name is Arman, and I represent the legal company Holland Lomax, and they were consulting the Ministry of Ecology when they were working on the new environmental code. Simply speaking, we are the people who were involved in writing the text of this code, and we may speak about it, what it was put into it, but taking into account that we are limited in time today, I just want very briefly dwell upon the main issues or main changes that were introduced into the environmental code and maybe of interest for the mining industry of Kazakhstan. Okay, now I'll launch my presentation. Very beginning about the context of the issuing or approval of the new environmental code. The old one existed from 2007. It means it was in force for 14 years. And we see the moment that we need to review the content of the code, and the new code was approved on the 2nd of January 2021, signed by the president, and from the 1st of July it became in force. And there are some of these statements in the code that are still in delay. Why? There was the reason to approve the new code. During these 14 years, when we were working according to the old code, the policy changed a lot in Kazakhstan. So during this time, we have approved the new strategy, Kazakhstan 2050, where we set the goal by 2050, Kazakhstan has to enter the list of 30 most developed countries of the world. Recently, we approved the concept to transition to green economy in Kazakhstan and some separate initiatives, strategies, and state programs within the same area. And the new environmental code, it was written and developed based on the recommendations that come from the international experts. In the complex review, they mean the problems of sore points in the old environmental codes and how to solve these problems. And of course, international factors like the ratification of the Paris Agreement by Kazakhstan and other economic factors like planned introduction of the transboundary carbon tax and to achieve the goals of climatic neutrality in different countries. All of these impact the vision in the country towards the regulation of environmental aspects. Now about the main parts and main sectors of the code. In general, I may say that within the new environmental code, we have changed the paradigm. If before legislation, very shortly, if to describe it, it was based on the principle, if you pollute, then pay. That was the concept of nature using, and the state took the certain charges for from enterprises that they provided an impact on the environment. It was the administrative fines in case of any violations. If there was any environmental damage, then they have to pay some kind of, they have to cover this damage. But we may say they were not liquidating the damage sometimes. In the new code, we have implemented this, again, this statement. All financial expenditures of the enterprise, first of all, would be invested into the prevention of the environmental damage to prevent any kind of negative impact on the environment. First of all, we assess the impact on the environment, then ecological control that must be performed by every operator of the hazardous enterprises or the objects that may potentially negatively impact the environment. Also, this is the concept of transition to the best available technologies and practices. It means the modernization of the technologies to reduce the time of negative impact on the environment, and also the concepts of direct liquidation and correction of the damage to environment, not only the payments. The payments are just in prevention to protect the environment. And now these money are used only for the environmental matters, only for this. And also what we see from these principles, new requirements in the legislation, they also require new sanctions for the violations of the clauses of the code. So there was some strengthening of the administrative penalties, more strict penalties, like, for instance, shutdown of some of the enterprises, or in case of violation, they have to compensate the environmental damage. If to speak about this evaluation assessment, the assessment of the impact, we have to think it's as a main tool. It was very close to the standard that exists in the European countries. This is the environmental impact assessment, and we oriented in the indicators that exist in the European Union. So the classification now you can find in the environmental code, and depending on the level of the hazardousness, so we have either to perform the assessment of impact on environment or screen procedure, or ecological assessment on a simplified manner. Another difference from the old code, the EIA process should be initiated at the earlier stages than it was before. Now, EIA, when you think about that you have to implement EIA just when you have the idea to start some kind of project on exploration of the deposits, natural deposits, or you come into the mining stage or development stage. And on this stage, you don't need to have any kind of rights to the land, to the area. There's no need to demonstrate that you have a license for the subsoil development. You can start this process at any moment. And now we see more active involvement of the other state bodies apart from Ministry of Geology. We also collaborate with the local executive authorities, also with the organs on emergency situation, healthcare authorities, and some other industries are also involved. And Ministry of Ecology have the role of a kind of coordinator, more as a coordinator, not the body that make the decision either to give the permission for the activity or not. And also the participation of the community, of the society also is very strong now, and it is stated in the procedures. It's according to the conventions, and it means that now the society, the community can quite actively express their opinion and participate at a higher level. And we can hear the voice of the community, of the people. And also in the new environmental code, we see the focus on preserving the ecosystems of biodiversity. There are some statements which are related to the loss of biodiversity and compensations of these losses. And that is all correspond to the general concept that we must be attentive not only on the activity and how it impacts the health of people, but also how it impacts the nature as it is. And what does it mean for the industry, for mining industry? It means that these processes, EIA, will be more complicated. It will become longer. It will become much longer than they were before. And you have to take it into account. We follow the example of the European countries where this procedure of environmental impact assessment may last for several years. In Kazakhstan also it may last for 3 years, for example, in Kazakhstan. Now about the environmental permits. In the new code, we also introduce a lot of changes for the first category of the enterprises to obtain the complex environmental permits, which are based on the application of the best available practices. It is mandatory. And we are talking now about the new enterprises that start from the scratch. About the current existing enterprises, we can withdraw the permit, but in case they're going to go through the refitting stage, they also have to follow the same principles, the same mode. And now, speaking about mining industry and geological explorations, there will be some reference books adopted about the best available practices. They may be vertical or horizontal. They may be either related to the particular activity, or they can be not related to any kind of activity, but cover some general processes which are characteristic to any kind of production. And we are talking about the, extraction and enrichment of the ores. This is the management and development of the stripping rocks, and also when we assess the geological projects, and also the issues of the purifications of the drainage waters. And we are very actively now work on these reference books. The Center of Green Technologies is involved in this work, and it's very important for all enterprises which will be impacted by these reference book, by these guidelines, also to take part in development of these, guidelines, that we wouldn't include there something which contradicts to the industrial practices, to the reality that we see now in Kazakhstan. It means that every enterprise now can be very, to stand for their position and to participate actively in the development of these guidelines. And also the second category of the enterprises, and these are smaller projects, as we're talking about the stockpiles of the deposits. This is the second category. So these enterprises, these objects have to get the standard permission, but we have enlarged the notion, the contents of this statement. Before, we just mentioned the norms about the emissions, disposals, and discharges. Now you have to obtain the permits for the, and we have the larger list of the environmental conditions under which you can perform your activities. What is another important thing now, this environmental code requires that these permits have to be assigned to the operator, to the owner. If before, it can be redirected to the service company before, those who perform the activities at the deposit, they were able to have the right of this environmental permit and to be responsible for it. Now it is no longer can be done. It means that the owner, the owner of the area or of the deposit, they have to control the work of all their subcontractors and contractors. On environmental damage, as I say, we have reviewed from the method of the indirect method of assessment of the damage. Now, when we identify the damage, the enterprise who is guilty for this damage have by themselves to liquidate the consequences of this damage, to perform remediation. And the complex measures of remediation is very wide. It can be the secondary remediation, and the state has the full control under this activity and to identify whether it was a successful remediation or not. And it can be repeated endless number of times until we achieve the required level. Also, we have to take into account that the code presupposes that for environmental damage, we can find and we can proclaim guilty not only the direct pollutant, but also the owner of the land. If, for example, the owner of the land or some kind of third party had performed this damage, we can also make this owner responsible for the damage. It means that all enterprises, when they perform the development of the deposits, the owners of this land have to be very attentive and control it quite thoroughly in order to prevent that the third parties would perform some kind of dangerous or harmful actions on their territory. And also environmental code now has expanded the duration for the responsibility for the guiltiness. This is 30 years now from the moment when this damage has been done. And historically, we say that some hidden objects that can damage the environment that also can be so-called revived, and the state can show the interest towards these objects, and there can be some kind of, cases and requirements to liquidate the damage. Waste. Now about the waste, we now operate according to the global practices. We apply these principles of hierarchy, and now the mining enterprises have to plan very thoroughly their activity, how they manage waste, and the responsibility for this, for the waste. This is otherwise, they are referred to some third party. In any way, the one who performed, who produced these wastes have to be responsible for this. And in general, recommendations and conclusions. For planning any kind of projects in mining industry, now that you have to think in long term, you have the long-term vision. When you perform this environmental impact assessment, you have to plan it not for 10, 15 years, but for much longer period. If enterprise thinks to have the mining works within 50, 60 years, it means that they have declared their expectations for a longer period. And they have to strengthen the role of the environmental services. So the enterprises not just to go visit different studies and to approve different documents, but now ecologists and the experts have to plan environmental risks, to be very careful when they work on the design, and to warn in advance the management about the potential risks, and also to think about the procurement policies in the enterprises to select, to choose the very reliable suppliers of equipment and services. For example, the service companies that perform some kind of construction works at the deposits, it means to prevent fully the enterprise from the potential sanctions on any kind of claims or reclamations that may come from the state within this new environmental code. I think this is all that I would like to cover. Of course, there are a lot of other things that have been changed, but unfortunately, we have not enough time to discuss it right now. Arman, thank you very much. I think the participants are going to ask questions with regard to the issues you have covered. I also may have some questions. Esteemed guests and participants, in case you have any questions to the speaker, please refer them to the chat. We will discuss them in the end of the session. Now I want to give the floor to Jane Jolin, the corporate consultant of the company SRK Consulting. She will speak about responsible sourcing, how to be sure your mineral products meet change and acceptance criteria. So it's very interesting. We are passing now to the selection of the suppliers, how to be sure that these mineral products meet change and acceptance criteria. Please, Jane.
Hello, thank you. Just check my slides are ready. Thanks, Anastasia. In this presentation, I would like to give a big picture view of criteria for responsible sourcing. Next slide, please. The concept of responsible sourcing needs to be viewed alongside all the other pressures on mining projects and operations in the emerging green economy. And this slide is illustrating most of those pressures. On the right is increasing legislation, and Man has given an excellent presentation about the increasing legislation in Kazakhstan. The Kazakh government is not only protecting the people and resources of Kazakhstan, but also industry, preparing it for the green economy. Then there are carbon pricing pressures. In Kazakhstan, you've got the emission trading scheme. China's introduced emission trading scheme. And if you are a steel or aluminium producer, you'll be very worried about the new carbon border adjustment mechanism being introduced in the EU. There's also responsible finance, investors, lenders, and insurers pressurizing companies to improve their performance. Lenders are incentivizing improvements in performance with sustainability-linked loans, where the interest rates of those loans are linked to ESG criteria. And investors who take an equity stake in companies are actively motivating the companies to improve their performance. Companies are also parent companies are doing sustainability disclosures, putting information out into the public domain for their business stakeholders and the public. The information that goes into the domain is being used by rating and rank by agencies who are public facing or facing investors, data providers for investors, and they're rating and ranking mining companies, and that puts pressure on mining companies too. So now coming down to responsible sourcing, that is pressure coming from downstream manufacturers and consumers of products, and it brings the focus onto the mineral products. And that is the focus of my talk today. A pressure that isn't shown on the slide is pressure from competition. Companies that focus more on the credential of their mineral products will be an advantage in future. Interesting thing about responsible sourcing is how quickly it's taking effect. We have seen downstream manufacturers recently say that they won't take mineral products from certain projects for sustainability reasons. The last point I want to make on this slide, and this relates to local communities. Local communities are empowered by the emerging green economy. There is a focus on them in standards. They no longer, if they have a pollution problem, they no longer just have to lobby the mine or government. They can go to other parties, other business stakeholders of the mines. You could see the local communities as rights holders and the other parties as duty holders. And they are doing that increasingly, going to investors or going to downstream manufacturers, telling them their problems, and even in some cases taking legal action. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates two responsible sourcing paradigms. On the left, we have supply chain due diligence, and that's an older concept. It's been linked to conflict minerals in the past, the worst forms of human rights abuse, human rights due diligence. The OECD supply chain really focuses predominantly on the worst forms of human rights abuse. Now, a new paradigms on the right are validation of sustainability criteria being met in the production phase. And a whole suite of standards have emerged for responsible sourcing. And I will tell you a little bit more about them and validation processes. There's also classification schemes. So if you look at the EU, the taxonomy regulation, that is classifying activities as sustainable. Mining is currently excluded from that classification, but steel and aluminium production are already included in that classification. Mining will be included in future. It doesn't only affect companies in the EU, with mining companies, because financial institutions must apply this regulation, and it could affect it sets precedents in the mining industry in general. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide is passports, and these are linked to blockchain technology, and I see that we've got a talk later on in the session on blockchain technology. Basically, information from the mine site can be taken down through the manufacturing processes or through downstream mineral processing. So the London Metal Exchange has introduced passports, and those passports carry information not only on metallurgical characteristics, but sustainability criteria. And they carry it from the mine site through mineral processing and through warehouses. Could we move to the next slide, please? This slide is just making the point that when you look at responsible sourcing, you do have to recognize the huge focus on human rights. And it's not just labor rights, but environmental impacts need to be viewed through a human rights lens. Most environmental impacts can be viewed through a human rights lens. A simple example is water. So impacts on water can be viewed as rights to water. And another good example of an industry standard that has got a huge human rights focus is the new Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, GISTM. That standard starts with human rights principles and it ends with human rights in terms of disclosure, referring to the United Nations guiding principles on human rights and a requirement to disclose certain information on tailings dams. Now, a lot of people who are not familiar talking about human rights feel intimidated by it, but really it's quite simple. It's a case of actually seeing the people who are affected. So the way you can make sure that you're respecting human rights is making sure that you see affected people around the mines, downstream of mines, and that there is engagement with them, and that the planning and management of impacts is taken to minimize impacts on the affected communities. Next slide, please. Now, this slide looks overwhelming. And this just shows the explosion of sustainability standards that have come about in the emerging green economy. And it is quite overwhelming. This is the way SRK organizes them to make more sense of them and to help our clients. So we see some of the standards as overarching standards. They're on the left. And they're really built into most of the other standards. And a company that's leading in sustainability, you will certainly find at a corporate level and in their policies, these will be built into the policies. In the second column is disclosure standards. Companies leading in sustainability are making disclosures with sustainability reports. They're generally reporting to GRI, but also report to SASB. And increasingly, mining companies are being encouraged by their investors to make disclosures according to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD. Then the green column is really the IFC, well, we call them lender standards, but it's the IFC standards, and the EBRD standards are very similar to the IFC standards. Now, they've been around for quite a long time, and they're still very important. They're actually built into many of the other standards. Quite a few of these responsible sourcing standards that are in the bright blue column refer to principles in the IFC performance standards. The important point that I want to make about the IFC performance standards is they really are about protecting human rights. And they have a big focus on the affected communities. The standards mention affected communities almost 100 times. And they also have a big focus on protecting biodiversity, quite leading in terms of the concept about how you protect biodiversity values. So the responsible sourcing standards that are mentioned there, leading companies preparing for responsible sourcing are picking a particular standard to align with, one or two, depending on what they're in. So say if they're a copper producer, looking at alignment with the copper mark, or a gold producer looking at alignment with the responsible gold mining principles. And they're preparing for validation of alignment with their sustainability performance aligning with these standards. The other standards just are related to specific issues. An important standard is the global industry standard on tailings management. I don't have time to elaborate on that anymore. And in the last column, it's just regional initiatives which are setting precedents elsewhere. And you can see there are a lot of European initiatives listed there, such as the batteries regulation, the taxonomy regulation, etc. I can't go into any more detail on the slide. I'm going to move on to the next slide, please. Now, these are, so you've got all those standards and it looks really overwhelming, but it's not really overwhelming if you look at the topics that they're covering. They're really all covering the same topics, and you can actually put these slides in a little nutshell box. This is what we're doing here on this slide. And on this slide, so these are the topics of environmental and social governance as covered in the responsible sourcing standards. And I've highlighted in yellow the topics which are quite important, I think, for Kazakh companies based on my experience working with Kazakh companies. These are areas where attention needs to be focused to align with these standards. And Arman's talk was very interesting because it just shows that the legislation is supporting companies to align with these standards as well. For example, if we talk about in the environmental bubble down at the bottom, you talk about biodiversity. These standards do require understanding of habitats and biodiversity values and working to offset biodiversity impacts and ideally get a net gain in biodiversity. That's just one example. Another thing is planning projects with closure vision. Arman talked quite a lot about that. Another thing is building climate change adaptation into the design of projects. Another is the concept of water stewardship, thinking of the whole catchment and water users in the catchment. I'm not going to go in any more detail on the slide because we're of time, but you can see that some of these topics covered in the slide connect very strongly with the new changes in legislation. Very clearly, the Kazakh government is preparing industry to align with expectations of future business stakeholders. We can move on to the next slide. This is a slide that we at SRK, as a company doing engineering and environmental services, it's actually an internal slide for strategic planning. This is the way we see that we can help mining companies. This is what we do. We recognize it's important when engineering projects, you've got to build sustainability into projects and operations. And it's important that there's legal compliance, alignment with sustainability standards. We need to see the affected communities, and we need to make sure that we're aware of the concerns of affected communities. And then it's important to design projects to avoid and minimize impacts on people and biodiversity. Keep the footprint of a project as small as possible. So the surface footprint, reducing emissions, discharges, energy used and waste, reducing the carbon footprint, preparing for climate change, enhancing positive socioeconomic impacts, and improving the credentials of mineral products. Water management needs to be undertaken in the context of the catchment. Waste management needs to be aligned with the international standards. Investors are very strongly expecting that. And with closure, starting with closure vision and reducing those liabilities as much as possible, and ultimately enhancing positive impacts where possible on social, water, and biodiversity. So the last slide is just my conclusions on responsible sourcing. And the main points, I'll just almost read them out. Basically, there is a rise in responsible sourcing. Sustainability credentials are being attached to mineral products. So the focus is not just on mines, but also on mineral products. And minerals for the green economy will have to meet human rights and green requirements. Most impacts, including environmental impacts, can be viewed as human rights impacts. So look through the human rights lens for all impacts. Companies should make disclosures expected of them by business stakeholders and need to walk the talk. Sustainability needs to be engineered into projects, operations, and products. And companies should prepare for third-party validation of their performance at site level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jane. Well, just perfectly fit into the schedule. Thank you. Colleagues, quite an interesting presentation, and some important topics were raised here. Oh, sorry, I need to switch to Russian. Достаточно интересные.
So it has been quite an exciting presentation, just covering very important topics, and obviously our participants will raise some questions in this regard, I believe, later. But with that, I would like to pass the floor to Akop Gargamanyan, Principal Bank and Natural Resources with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And Akop will be covering the topic of investment in the mining sector in Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Victor. Good morning, good day, dear colleagues. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of the forum for inviting me to make a presentation here on this very representative forum. I'll start with the short description of our bank. European Bank of Reconstruction and Development is one of the largest institutional institute which operates in Kazakhstan from the beginning of 90s. We invest into the private and public companies in different sectors of the economy, including energy, power, telecommunication, oil and gas, consumer sector. And the current portfolio of our projects is about $3 billion of US. About mining sector, bank finances projects on different stages. Our partners in Kazakhstan are the large Kazakh and foreign companies who perform or plan their activity in the country. Apart from financing, from funding that we are involved in debt financing, equity financing, we also work on different initiatives in Republic Kazakhstan, including legislative one, in order to increase the investment attractiveness of different sectors of the economy. Now about investment attractiveness of the sector and investment into the mining sector. Of course, mining sector is very important, very significant for Kazakhstan, the one that provides over 40% of all profits and, come to the budget. Maybe I repeat something that was already said in the forum, but when we're talking about investments into the mining center and investment attractiveness, we of course have to think about the competitiveness of the industry and competition within it to attract the money into the mining sector of the big companies. If we are talking about the foreign investors, of course, Kazakhstan have to compete not only with the other countries of the region, with Russia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, but with the other developing countries. And this competition is for the rather limited funds that we see today in the international capital market. We are talking about the projects at the very early stages, at the stage of geological exploration, and we also speak about the more advanced stages of the projects. When we assess the competitiveness ability, first of all, we pay attention to the risks which are intrinsic to the country, to the industry, and there are a lot of risks and different for different investors. Main risks are not related with Kazakhstan in general, and they're well known. There's volatility of the financial markets. These are prices at the commodity markets, economic cycle, and from the last year, it's a global pandemic. But investors also interested in the risks which are manageable on the level of the state and separate companies. Some of these risks in terms of Kazakhstan I'll try to analyze. I have to mention that favorable decision of these issues related to the policy of the country, related to the increasing of the investment attractiveness, including foreign investors. First risks or first aspect that I want to cover, this is access to the capital or liquidity. Of course, access to the capital depends a lot on the stage of the development of the project or the company. If there is lack of liquidity or capital, it is a problem for many companies, especially at the stage of geological exploration. And currently, it's really a sore point. In 2020, the global expenditures at exploration go down 10%. It's $8.7 billion US dollars. It means they're much less than we saw 10 years ago, for example. In 2012, and you see it on the slide now, they were over $20 billion US dollars. It means they were two times higher. It means that the competition to the access to the capital is growing. And the next block of the issues, these are regulatory risks, then licensing, access to the information. And these matters have been discussed at the forum already. Yesterday, for example, from 2018, in Kazakhstan, we see the new legislation in the field of subsoil management, and this is rather advanced in comparison not only with the other countries of the region, but also in terms of the global advancement. And the new procedures of obtaining the license allow us to give 1,400 new rights for subsoil management since 2080, but the main receivers of the license are the Kazakh physical and legal entities, and among them we see very low number of foreign investors. And we know the regulators in Kazakhstan are working in terms of improvement of the legislation to make it more transparent, including the wide range of foreign investors. Yesterday, we spoke a lot about this item, and we heard what have been achieved already and what we still have to do in this respect to make legislation, infrastructure more attractive. Issues, environmental issues and ESG, these are the main issues that are now discussed a lot and analyzed everywhere, specifically in terms of investments and not only in Kazakhstan. Recently, I saw the results of the survey that was prepared by colleagues from EY. And according to these results, 97% of the investors, when they make their decision, they also analyze non-financial aspects, non-financial risks. And among them, environmental risks are very important, and of course, management and control of these risks. We talk a lot about ESG yesterday and today, so I'm not going to dwell upon it for a long time. As Arman mentioned in the beginning of the session, the environmental code is corrected and becomes more stringent. It's important that these changes will be transparent and will be introduced gradually, step by step. Kazakhstan takes an obligation to become carbon neutral by 2060. And investors, specifically those who are not having their business in Kazakhstan, will be interested what is the strategy of this transition and what are intermediate results that must be achieved on this road, on this way. We need this information to take into account environmental aspects when we plan investments and to assess the capital investments for future. You see these big letters, capital letters ESG, and this is a kind of proof that is very important topic today. And of course, this rather short discussion within the session cannot give us the possibility to go very deep into the detail of this issue, of this matter. And to sum up, the competition to attract funds, it grows and it becomes more and more sharp. And to be competitive, we have to develop the investment climate using the transparent and innovative legislative initiatives and to support it with the liquidity of the companies. This is a rather complicated task by itself, and it is difficult because other countries also try to attract money, but I think that Kazakhstan has all possibilities to move successfully on this way and to implement successfully this task. I think that is all. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Very interesting topic, very interesting discussion, and I think it shows what is the link between the ESG and money. We talked about it yesterday and we'll continue to speak about it today. And now I want to give the floor to next speaker. This is Malik Nishanbayev. He is the head of mining Astana International Exchange. And Malik will tell us how this exchange may come the link between the investors and mining companies. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear participants. I would like to share my presentation with you. Next slide, please. By way of introduction, Astana International Exchange, so that is well known in its English name, and that was established 4 years ago. So quite a recent institution, also part of the financial center of Astana, and the purpose. So can you see the sign in on the screen right now? It's okay now. So the purpose of setting up Astana International Exchange was to make it a financial hub for both domestic and international investors and issuers. And we are proud of having investors such as Shanghai Stock Exchange, Goldman Sachs, and Nasdaq. These are very prominent players. And right, so my presentation will be echoing those aspects that we just seen from previous presentations. And yes, the subsoil code adopted in Kazakhstan, so it is modeled on the Western Australia law of 1978 as related to mining sector. And that was the first come, first served principle that we decided to use as an underlying principle. And the license can be obtained within 10 days. Actually, I think in practice it will be slightly longer than 10 days, but most importantly, we have set up a very straightforward playground and the rules of the games are clear. So the idea was just to reduce the investment directed to Kazakhstan and also to the volume of investment to the extraction of solid minerals. So as of today, it is 1,300 licenses issued for exploration and extraction or production of minerals, and then 1.25 million square kilometers are available for exploration works. And then we have data that you can find in many, just lots of literature. So these are the actually what can be extracted in Kazakhstan in terms of minerals, gold, silver, and so on. So this map shows this is key centers for mining companies. So if they want to develop their business, so they need to seek these instruments from either Toronto or Australia. So I will not describe those the amount of funds that can be raised in Toronto and Australia. Obviously, looking at both centers, we see that they are far away from the CIS area. So, and it's our hope in Astana that probably will be able to just get closer to the standards set up by Toronto Stock Exchange and the Australian Securities Exchange. So, and the critical thing, and that's also resonates with what Akop mentioned, just for startup ups and junior companies. So that's the lack of access to finance, and the reasons being is that these are young companies, they don't have a background history, and obviously the owners of those enterprises or companies do not have an adequate knowledge, so they don't have audited reports, or their reports have not been audited yet, so no workable capital and no corporate management scheme in place, and competence persons report is not in place as well, because that's the report that describes the state of reserves as of the time the license is issued. So this can be estimated reserve for the purposes of production, or there could be forecast reserves for the purposes of exploration. So what we are trying to do is to bridge that gap by putting forward a mechanism that would enable junior companies to raise funds through Astana exchange. So just decided to follow the path that is well known across popular exchanges such as Toronto. So there is a two-tier system with requirements for a variety of mining companies. So as contrasted with advanced stage that also assumes that they do have their proven reports, and they have also reporting that is in line with either G or RC and or an I-43-101 for Kazakhstan. So probably once per year we'll be receiving their reports on either exploration or production. So if the funds are there, then the access to the financing will be also provided. And that will, as I said, that was the advanced tier. And then we have yet another tier that is more simplified, is venture. And again, still, reporting will be required. The reports will have to be made by this competent person as per GORC or Y43101, plus confirmation will be needed to demonstrate that the company has adequate funds to cover 12 months of operation. I already mentioned that one of the key advantages of our exchange is that we have this very segment that is dedicated to mining companies, very flexible and built-in finance instruments. So we'll be providing discounts and subsidies to the issuers that just start the operations further. We have the court, and the court operations are based on English law, and probably this is considered as a unique organization that provides an opportunity to have disputes resolved through this court that is that relies on the principles of English law. So over this short period of time, and we started in 2017, so that the year which saw this creation or the exchange. So that's the timeline that has seen IPO of Gazatom. And next came Polymetal, it's a Russian company. Then Polymetal was followed by Ferroalloy. This is one just of interesting stories in the junior sector. And then let's look at pre-IPO that covered Gazprom and Chubarko Kamir. And then also we received, now we have shares from Altin. So there's work in progress for our web portal. So the web portal will be publishing information about junior projects on our platform. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the principal challenge for junior companies is a lack of geological reports that with those companies that can become issuers, then audit reports, also the lack of solid corporate management structures. So the combination of these factors actually hampers the entry of the companies to the exchange. Nevertheless, we do work with certain companies that are going through the this IPO, so we are expected to have their shares exchange, and I will not name those companies because the process is not completed, but we do believe that other junior companies will join our exchange. And thank you for listening. Thank you so much. It's quite an inspiring speech, and I hope that this will be of great use to the participants of our session. And we have received one question already, so it will be addressed later. And dear participants, so let me remind you that you are very welcome to put your questions in the chat box. So now I'd like to give the floor to Oksana Megli, the Director with Money, Metals and Industry Finance with Societe Generale. So Oksana, so we're expecting to hear from you more about sustainable finance solutions for money and metal producers.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conference. I will quickly introduce myself, and then I will maybe share with you some thoughts about sustainable finance solutions for mining and metal producers. So I'm a business development director in the metals and mining team at Societe Generale based in Paris. Some of you might already know Societe Generale. It's a French bank. We have been present in Kazakhstan for a number of years. We have been working with some of the mining and metals companies in the country, and we are glad to share the possibility to talk about how the ESG, how the sustainability is opening new opportunities for the producers of the sector. Next slide, please. we, as a French bank, as a European bank, we have been very much influenced by the recent legislation and by the recent developments of the regulatory requirements. And in particularly, we have been influenced by the recent agreement, Paris Agreement on the climate, which have made out of the finance a new strong tool for supporting the sustainable development and for reaching the target for the warming up of the temperatures. And one of the particular features which was expected from the bank is to finance more projects which support the transition to low carbon economy on one side, and on another side to support those projects which do not significantly harm to the environment and do not have any negative impacts on the society. We have been also recently influenced by the recognition of the fact that mining and metals are actually key for the energy transition, and by the fact that it has been by now widely recognized that we would need more metals for the deployment of the low carbon technologies like EV batteries, or for instance the construction of wind turbines or solar panels, and that all shifted our thinking and our offer to the client. We have transformed ourselves from metals and mining bank to the bank which is more present in the downstream in the industries. And how we did it, we are supporting our clients' adaptation, in particularly through the sustainability linked and green financing product offer. We have been supporting the producers which produce the metals such as copper, such as lithium, such as bauxite, which are really the key enabling factor for the deployment of these low carbon technologies. We have been supporting Kazakh producers of such metals as well. We are also actively working with those who are already engaged in the reduction of the emissions through financing or advisory to specific decarbonization projects, and particularly in the steel supply chain. For instance, we are working with a Swedish green steel project as an advisor. And finally, we are actively supporting the deployment of EV value chain. We are supporting the projects in Europe. We are also working with Asian producers, and we know that the common thing for all this is metal. And it brings us to the initial question: how can we provide more financing to the clean, ethically produced metals? And what are the financing tools, the financing instruments which can support such initiatives? So today I will focus more on the sustainability linked products. And if you look on the on the left of this slide, you will see that we have been pioneers in the sector of sustainability linked and green financing offer to metal producers. We have been sustainability coordinator for the aluminium producer Rusal, for iron ore and the steel maker Metallo Invest, to the gold mining company Polymetal, and also to Uralkali. So it demonstrates that the sector is very active. And if we go on the next slide, you will see that the financing solutions are quite wide, quite numerous. those which we see commonly deployed for the sector, it's sustainability-linked loans and green loans. Maybe a few words on the difference of these financing instruments. The green loans and the sustainability-linked loans, they have a different purpose of the different use. On the green loan side, you will see that it's a dedicated instrument, so that the client would need to have a number of dedicated projects, green projects, which are aligned with the eligibility categories of the green loan principles, which is an internationally accepted reference for this type of transactions. So for green loans, a good example of a transaction which was closed with a mining company, it was a green loan of polymetal, which put in place a supporting framework with a number of green categories, ranging from the renewable energy to the water management to the clean mobility categories. And the loan which was provided was aligned, was really dedicated to these specific categories. More often we see on the market the sustainability-linked loans, and since 2018, there has been really growing number of such transactions on the market, and I will get back to that in the next slides. Sustainability-linked loan is the financing which is linked, where the margin is linked to the performance of under a selected number of social and environmental objectives of the company. So it's a tailor-made product. It's based on the own commitments of the company, on its tied to its CSR strategy. It really allows to highlight the key challenges and the way the company addresses such key challenges. We also have a number of other instruments, for instance, bonds, green social sustainability bonds, also sustainability-linked bonds. The difference would be also the use of proceeds. The main feature of the main difference with loans would be the fact that to issue a bond, you would need to have a certain critical number of projects, and for the smaller size financing, we think that loans could be a good starting point. We also see that there is a growing number of sustainability-linked derivative solutions which are appearing on the market. Société Générale is also active providing these solutions to its clients. I will not talk about it during this presentation. If we go on the next slide, we can see that the market has been growing rapidly for the sustainability-linked loans. Among the general corporate purposes loans on the European market, the percentage of the transactions, syndicated transactions with sustainability features grew from 9% in 2018 to 50% in the transactions which were closed in 2021. So it's really becoming a mainstream feature. It's becoming commonly used by especially by the large corporates. We see that it's not only it's not only the percentage of the transactions with the KPIs, but it's also the number of transactions and the volume of transactions. What's also interesting to note is that in a sustainability linked product, you can tie your performance either to your ESG rating, your extra financial rating, or to the to a set of your own performance objectives. And between 2019 and this year, there has been a strong shift towards the preference of the KPIs of connecting your performance to this set of objectives which are tailor-made, and I think that it's also true in the transactions which have been closed in the metals mining space. If we go on the next slide, it's a selected list of transactions in the space, in the mining and metal space, which have been closed recently. You will see that the borrows have been predominantly European. It's largely, let's say, the trend has really started in Europe, but now it's being rolled into the markets in the other countries. There have not been, unfortunately, any transactions, at least to our knowledge, which have been closed in Kazakhstan with the sustainability-linked features for the corporates and in the mining sector. But there are some Russian deals. You will see Polymetal sustainability-linked loan closed in 2019, as well as Metallo Invest in 2020, Rusal in 2019, and LMK last year, Uralkali this year. So it's a market which is developing and growing. Interesting thing to mention is that a lot of them have been linked to the KPIs, the performance was linked to the KPIs. And one KPI which we have seen in all of such transactions is the performance under the CO2 emissions level. So the companies have been identifying how can they have an influence on the climate, how can they reduce the emissions, increase the share of the renewable energy in their energy mix, and they have been linking their performance, the margin, financial performance, to the reduction of these emissions. And if we go on the next slide, please. Yes, so the conclusion is the conclusion which I would like to highlight again is that it's a growing market. So far, those which benefit from such structures are mainly large corporates, which have strong reporting, which have already the CSR strategy, and who are able to commit to a specific number of targets, medium-term targets. What is important is that the transparency is really the key for the banks in agreeing such mechanisms with the bank, because obviously the banks rely on the public disclosure of the companies, and very often they need to have a verified audited sustainability report to agree on the verification of the performance under the sustainability linked products, and and also in the assessment of the environmental and social performance of a company, because such product as a sustainability linked product could have both benefits for a company, but also have risks associated with let's say perception of such a product by larger community, and the company would need to have a strong disclosure, strong communication on its sustainability practices, both in the reporting and in the procurement, as well as on the strategy. And I would like to thank you for this time, and happy to answer the questions which you might have.
Thanks a lot, Oksana. Спасибо большое. Вопросы наверняка могут быть.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. I also have some questions, and I hope they will have time to discuss them. Now I want to give the floor to Matt Mullins. He is the executive consultant of Snowden Company, and he planned to talk about optimal resources development through effective project decision. Please.
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you for this opportunity to present to the conference today. I've really appreciated the previous talks, and there have been some excellent issues and concepts raised that I'd like to build on in terms of my talk, which is really going to talk about the project development pipeline, how that is evolving, and how we need to look at it from a person who has historically been involved in not only project development, but also in the governance of project development. And so the main focus of my talk will be on the technical side, but very much how the ESG aspect is modifying how we look at project development, modifying how we make our decisions. And when I talk about decisions, it's really talking about how we put forward projects for approval for investment by various investment companies, as has been spoken about during this session. So if we just look at, I'd like to just take a step back and just look at the industry today and where we're at. Mining.com keeps an excellent index of the size of the industry, sitting at about $1.5 trillion at the moment for the top 50 companies, market capitalization, which is a proxy for the size of the industry. You could probably double that for the total size if you include all of the other listed companies and all of the service providers. The industry has emerged enormously successfully from COVID, putting on a massive $754 billion in that index from March, April last year. And it has raised a lot of questions about, are we at the start of a new super cycle? I was privileged to experience the last super cycle with a large mining company, and I know how the industry reacted to that super cycle, to the demand that we had and the prices that we were seeing. Or are we just at a small boomlet? My personal opinion is the former, and certainly I think a lot of indicators are showing that. Just to put it in context, the market cap of Apple is about 6, which is about double the industry, and banking about 9 trillion, which is 3 times the industry. That doesn't indicate the importance of the industry, obviously, towards future development of living standards in the world. My personal comments on where we're at the moment, I've certainly seen the industry become a lot more productivity focused, a lot more efficiency focused. One of the things we don't talk about a lot is the management styles that have evolved largely from command and control in some parts of the world to largely a collaborative style of management, which has been enormously beneficial. We've embraced technology right throughout the value chain, from exploration to mining, and we have also embraced largely diversity, especially gender diversity. And the important one at the end is that we've held on to HSEC gains particularly with respect to safety and the safety record. That stood us in very good stead in terms of getting out of COVID, or coping with COVID. I won't say getting out of it, in terms of how all of the systems that were put in place to look at safety aspects of our exploration and mining operations could be used to actually help us develop safer operations when it came to COVID. I'll leave you on this slide with a comment from Mark Henry, and which I fully agree with, that we've still seen population growth. We've seen massive decarbonization taking place, and rising living standards, despite what's happened with COVID, are still going up, and that will continue to drive our energy and metals markets. And that is why it's so critical to have the way that we look at how we develop these markets and how we spend the money when we actually commit to development of various projects. So just a quick recap, this would be familiar to all of you, I'm sure, in that the project pipeline, as we develop projects, goes from advanced exploration, concept, pre-feasibility, feasibility, through into execution, and becomes an asset. The critical thing here is that the early part of the project pipeline is focused largely on value creation. The latter part of the project pipeline is focused on value delivery. And the thinking that we need to apply in this project pipeline starts with strategic thinking. Are we in the right commodities, the right geographies, the right size of project? Through divergent thinking, what are the different ways that we can develop our project into convergent thinking? Those little triangles show that those are the toll gates where a major decision needs to be made through that project pipeline. And this is pretty well recognized by the industry. There are still many companies or proponents of cutting out the pre-feasibility stage, my experience is that is usually a mistake, and that it should, even if in a minor way, still be conducted. If we go to what are the key deliverable aspects of each stage in the project pipeline, and this is where ESG comes in. Firstly, on the concept study, the critical deliverable is, do we have a project? Do we have a viable project? And can we measure that viability? The second pre-feasibility stage, the critical deliverable is, have we looked at enough options to make sure that we're going to take the right option through into feasibility study? And in the feasibility study, the critical aspect is, have we optimized that particular option that we chose? Where ESG comes into play at the moment is that our standard measures of toll gating in terms of what we study are evolving from largely based on financial metrics and engineering studies towards fully understanding our ESG aspects and fully being able to value those ESG aspects to be able to incorporate them into the decision-making process. As I'll show you at the bottom there, from the capital estimate accuracy, those are also accuracies that we need to apply in the ESG space. If we move on there, ESG is not new in the mining industry. This is a typical agenda for a feasibility study based on work that I did, I think, close to 20 years ago. And you can see even then the issues of health, safety, environment, and community were critical parts of the study. However, the ESG aspects are receiving additional intense scrutiny. I've been blown away by how much scrutiny they are receiving. A complicated regulatory landscape has evolved, as some previous speakers have spoken about. Jane in particular, I was impressed with the one complicated slide that you showed. It really does indicate how we need to really get our minds around that landscape. But at the same time, multiple initiatives are further complicating the landscape. And there, in many of the initiatives which are evolving, there is a lack of comparability, and there's also a certain amount of overlap. There's, to me, a great need to actually resolve this going forward. There are probably too many initiatives. It's very difficult to get your mind around it fully, but they are necessary. But it is important for us to actually make sure that we can compare them across the landscape that we're looking at. So these are the financial metrics, and as you can go through it, that the ones that I've shown you here are the key financial metrics for making decisions in projects. Your standard ones, your net present value, internal rate of return, capital efficiency ratio, and payback value. There are many others, of course, but these do not lend themselves very easily to measurement through of ESG aspects. And we need to develop a transparent way of measuring ESG and of actually incorporating them into our project valuations. And not only that, but to incorporate them transparently and to be able to show them separately so that we are well aware of what the cost is of ensuring that we not only are complying, and I'm not talking about a box ticking exercise in terms of ESG, but that we are actually doing the right thing in terms of ESG, in terms of the environment, the social, and the governance side. Maximum value, as you know, is created in the steep part of the S-curve, and that's also the maximum risk area in terms of the development of a project. So as you go on the left-hand side, if you go from concept study to feasibility study, the point I made there is that value can be destroyed through poor project definition, inadequate front-end loading, and that applies exceptionally to ESG issues. And that is why we need the metrics that we can actually measure ESG and incorporate into our projects so that we actually know that we are doing adequate and proper front-end loading on the ESG side. I was impressed with the Kazakhstan environmental code on the early stage involvement of that code. This would fit in exactly with what we're talking about here in terms of not only value creation, but also possible value destruction on the S-curve. This is not a trivial issue, although the maximum amount of money is committed when a project is actually the decision is made to go ahead with the project. Feasibility studies can cost a significant amount, and so we need to be sure that we, right in the beginning, have set up our ESG metrics and are tracking them through the project. If you look at the just best-in-class systems, and this is leads on from the previous slide, if we want to develop a good project, there are standard sort of principles that pretty much the industry tends to follow in terms of single point accountability, continuity, a project experience, and front-end loading. And again, this translates, if we don't do that well, into poor IRR. So we can turn a good project into a poorer project through inadequate front-end loading, through inadequate experience. And here, a word of warning perhaps is that one of the areas that has been mentioned that much in the previous discussions is the role of the reporting and valuation codes. Talking about the CRISCO codes and JORC in particular. I think the previous speaker did mention them. And JORC was set up very much as a technical reporting with environmental, social, and governmental factors being part of the modifying factors in conversion from resource to reserve. And here I refer to applicable project experience. Many competent persons like myself wouldn't necessarily be experts on ESG. And I know that there are a number of initiatives to include ESG in a much stronger way on the CRISCO codes. And we need to make sure that our competent persons are either fully trained in the ESG space or actually rely on experts in that space. Again, going down to final point 7, the role of independent reviews in this area would ensure that any ESG analysis is not just a box ticking exercise, which is my fear. To just about finish off, the strengths of our approach are, I think, the fact that we follow it throughout the industry. I've just noted a couple of strengths in the structured approach, but the weaknesses, firstly, we have got better at avoiding mistakes in terms of project development, but we've also probably slowed it down. It can be lengthy, it can be costly. Marginal projects tend to be subject to churn, especially at toll gating, and that is, I think, where ESG is going to come in, because if we are unsure about the ESG aspects, we are going to slow our projects down, and it is going to cost us more. We need to be particularly careful about that, and again, gets back to the need for comparability of standards and metrics. And also the final one, we struggle to kill projects. So, or to be ruthless in pushing them back to pre-feasibility study, and we need to get better at that. Just the final one, final conclusions. So I do have concern that ESG requirements may add additional time and cost. However, I think we can get around that through the comparability of standards. We need to be clear that if we do add time and cost to our project development, will this be reflected in increased commodity prices, or will investors be happy with potentially lower returns? And as the previous speaker spoke about, absolutely, I think investment is very much sustainability focused, ESG focused, climate change focused. And I think the investor appetite for not necessarily the optimum project from an NPV point of view, but an optimum project from a, let's call it financial and sustainability point of view, is really where the world is heading. However, just as a rider to that, I've said it a couple of times that we need comparable ESG metrics and standard comparable guidelines across the various areas. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Thanks a lot. Good outputs, and I think that they could be considered by the companies who do hear, listen, and look for interesting solutions for them during today's session. Я хотел бы передать слово одному из последних участников.
So with that, I would like to pass the floor to one of the to the last speaker during our session, Tatiana Matveyeva, geologist with the Kemny chain. So Tatiana, hopefully we'll hear a lot from you about this unexpected topic, which is blockchain's role in mining ESG. This is a buzz, I mean, blockchain, that's become a buzzword, and then many people would be just using it, and let's see how this can be applied.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy for this kind of introduction that now everybody talks about blockchain. And when we talk about blockchain, we link to in the word revolution because it's a revolutionary technology. I'm a geologist and I work with a lot of data, geological data, and I may assess that database is very important to analyze, to process data, to extract the required information. And when I became aware about blockchain technology, it inspired me, and I founded my own company a year and a half ago. And now we support mining companies and other participants of the mining market to adapt, to adjust their work to blockchain technology. Today, we're talking about ESG, about the environmental protection, labor protection. That is why I'll focus on blockchain technology and how this technology in mining industry can support company in this particular aspect. First of all, I make a very short introduction. What is blockchain actually? I think I try to do it in an old-fashioned manner, not to do it in a PowerPoint. I'll use this type of, cards, and I draw something during the presentation. Blockchain. Okay, what is blockchain? Block. First, I draw a block. This is block of data. We have many of them, blocks of data, and they're linked by chain. And you cannot tear off this chain. Blockchain technology was developed in 90s, but it became well-known and famous and started to be applicable when Bitcoin came into existence for cryptocurrencies. That was the first cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. So these blocks of data, that what you have and what have been transferred from one to another. And this technology on mathematical level, we're not going deeper within this short presentation. So this technology allows you, without any violation, to preserve this information, who owns what, when, and when it was transmitted or given up to someone. These are the basics of this technology. So what was the beginning of our work? We have a centralized database. What does it mean? For instance, talking about the mining company. So we have a mine. They collect some data. We have a laboratory. They also get some data. And we have a company. And this company transport, concentrate in their lorries and their trucks, and they also have their own data. And all these data goes to our central database. Yeah, from every, from every partner, from every participant, it comes here, and the company owns this information, and this is very good. But on the other hand, this company can change this information, which can be quite, convenient for them. And from this, what kind of problem we see when we have mining company with their own database? We have an investor also with its own database. We have a customer, for example, the end user, the one who produces mobile phones, for example, with their own database again. And in between these participants, these players, there's no trust in between them because there's no guarantee that the data that was transmitted from one participant to another, they're absolutely unchangeable and no one can correct something here or delete something here after they were transmitted, this data. And after it, we can see the disputes in the courts, and then we see an opportunity that we have to verify this data. We need the support of the third party. So this is the advantage of the blockchain technology, that it, eliminates this necessity of the third parties, like, crypto exchanges bank is an intermediate between the people who transfer money in between themselves, or state is a mediator which approves some kind of licenses, the ownership for the licenses. Blockchain technology allows to avoid these intermediaries, those who of course take time and money. And we spoke a lot about this, but it costs a lot, actually, these services, and to correspond to all these requirements, to go through different type of inspections and checks. So blockchain technologies allows you to minimize these costs critically many times, due to the fact that the data that goes to this database, they can always be checked, can be verified by the mathematical algorithm of this database. Blockchain technology is also the technology of the distributed database or distributed register. What does it mean? That all our participants with their databases, they are connected into the chain, they are within this chain, and every entry which goes into this chain, it is encrypted with the help of encryption. And every transmission of data from one participant, from one player to another, is also encoded. It's so-called hashing mechanism. I have no time to speak about this. I don't think it's really important, but there's a law that has been said about blockchain, and many companies use it. I may say it works. This is the most important. We save data and we save the information about transmission of data from one company to another. If you ever work with due diligence, for example, of the enterprise, you know how important it is which file have been given to you for reviewing. Is it the last file or not? Do you have all information? Is it completed? When you check databases, it takes a lot of time, usually, you know, and of course it costs money as well, and reliability. You cannot check the whole database during due diligence. You can check just 5–10%, but blockchain technology allows you that you can be sure that 100% of the data that can be submitted, first of all, cannot be changed, cannot be corrected in any way, without informing or notifying all participants of the chain. And thus, blockchain can provide transparency of the transitions and data safety. What are the ESG parameters that are most popular now, most common to save on the blockchain plan? First of all, this is CO2 emissions. We talk about it a lot today. Next, percentage of the power consumption which comes from the renewables, hydro power stations, from wind units, from solar. It's also very important now, PVs. Then origin of your metal, where it comes from, where your metal comes from, if there are any kind of slavery or children's labor, and of course, labor safety, parameters of labor safety. And blockchain platform is easily integrated with all type of devices that can collect information. We know we now have the artificial intelligence. We check whether everyone has safety jackets, do they have the light reflectors. So all this information coming from different sensors and counters to the platform, and automatically we can provide the safety of all data that we receive without interference of the human. And the less interference of the human beings we have, the better the situation. Thus, blockchain platform performs the trustful inter-exchange between the participants of the deals through the mathematical algorithm. So who are the members of this deal? You know, I just generalize. This is a mining company, investors, and end users, consumers, for instance, the manufacturers of electric vehicles. It was also mentioned today, the passport products and the London Exchange, you know, they now require this passport to all metals that are supplied. And naturally, the state, government. So blockchain provides this trust in between all the participants, among the participants. And now I'll tell you what companies already use this technology. And for this, I'll go to the more modern, methods, because we're talking about logos, and I don't want to draw myself to show you my own skills. So you know this company, I'm sure, the largest mining company, and I started my work with this BHP. Now they announced that together with Tesla, they're going to use blockchain technology not only to provide the safety of their supplies of nickel to batteries from Western Australia, but also to preserve on this platform all information about the ESG parameters and to prove that their nickel is a sustainable product, a good, reliable nickel, and they shouldn't be ashamed of this product, and they can use it in their batteries, accumulators. I also want to speak about Circular company. Can you see it? Yes, logo. Circular, they now have a lot of news. And this company, it's a startup from London, and they began with providing safety of supplies of cobalt from Congo, from licensed mines, but they grew very rapidly, and now we work for nickel, for and they declared that lithium they will follow it from the solutions. They also will follow the CO2 emissions when this lithium is developed, and they will save all this data, and they will give the access to this data to all investors on their blockchain platform. And today they announced or declared that the first hydro plant in London that will build batteries, they also use blockchain of Circular company to follow, to monitor CO2 emissions while production of these batteries. Rio Tinto, well-known company in Kazakhstan, recently announced that they're going to issue this passport for their aluminium. That is called START program, and all batches of aluminium that are produced by Rio Tinto will have the information about all parameters, ESG parameters, that will be attached to the supplied batch of aluminium. Norilsk Nickel company, they reported it in our blockchain mining platform, and they mentioned how difficult it is to collect all these documents to comply with all ESG requirements, and they work with Global Palladium and Platform Aqua Mines, and they have developed blockchain platform. They issue tokens for their products, and in these tokens they also have information about all ESG parameters, which are also attached to the lot of their products. I invite all of you, please come and have a look at the presentation Anton Berlin from Norilsk Nickel. It's very interesting information, and we have even associations, industry associations that are engaged on these responsible supplies. responsible sourcing blockchain initiative on the IBM platform Hyperledger. They follow many metals. They monitor them, not a single company, but for multiple companies. For mine, you know, we have gold mines in Kazakhstan, and it's very important for Kazakhstan. So many companies now monitor gold, responsible gold, the company that presented in our company. They monitor gold from mines to the plant, to the user, to the purchaser. They apply different methods for it. In order to monitor on blockchain platform, you just have to transform your physical metal into a digital type as a digital document. There are a lot of technologies that allow you to do it. And again, I'll be glad to talk about it, but unfortunately, I'm pressed of time. I have no time, but it works, believe me. For the larger metals, so there is an example, SVAL7 company. They monitor CO2 emissions while they manufacture steel manufacturing, and they now work with BASF company and also monitor all ESG parameters for the other metals as well, for copper, cobalt, and etc. on their own blockchain platform. Everledger company from Australia, they began with monitoring diamonds. It was at the beginning just to prove to the purchasers, to the users, that they come from legal sources. Their diamonds come from the legal sources, but now they monitor much more materials. They focus on the precious stones, first of all, and they also make stress on all ESG parameters, everything related to environmental and labor safety, and with the legal origin of their minerals. This is logo of my company, ComniChain. So we support mining companies, investors. We support them in studying this blockchain market. It's very big and it's growing rapidly. Mining companies are lagging a little bit behind the other companies, the other participants of the industry in terms of their adaptation to blockchain technology, but I think it's just temporary, and we'll catch with the other companies and we'll be ahead of them. So I will be happy to answer your question. Please contact me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Tatiana. Really very interesting approach. I wonder how it's going to be applied by the companies that work in the country and in the region. Colleagues, we have just a little time before we end the session. I just want to use this opportunity and maybe we can have this Q&A session. Dear organizers, are there any questions in the chat? Please refer them to me. Yes, I can see some of them in the chat. I'm not sure that we will be able to cover all of them, but I'll try to do my best. I'll try to. One of the first questions that we see in the chat, and maybe this question is to Malik Alishanbayev, or maybe some others can comment on this. So the question is the following. To prepare the report on the standard York, it's a very expensive process. Can we rely on the support of AIX in this respect? AIX in this respect, please. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, sure, we can hear you. Yes, one of the main problems, as I mentioned, for the development of junior market in Kazakhstan is that our young companies who are at the beginning don't have enough experience in terms of what is necessary to be registered on exchange listing. not always they do understand why and what for they need the report, which is prepared according to the JORC standards or RID 101. And this is, of course, rather expensive. In Kazakhstan, prices or costs for these services, one of the main geological companies, starts from $20,000 and maybe up to $100,000. It depends on what kind of deposit we are dealing with. For the beginners in mining industry, of course, it's rather expensive. And quite often they are not ready to spend such money on this type of reports because they think when they spend this money, there's no any kind of guarantee that they will get the finance and the funds from the exchange, stock exchange. So we are now thinking or considering as an option the possibility that we as an exchange, I just want to repeat, it's possible, this is not the final decision, that we are ready to finance the preparation of geological reports for the junior companies in order to stimulate junior market in Kazakhstan. This initiative is under discussion. We are not making a secret out of it. I think it's a normal initiative, good initiative, and if we will be able to help our junior companies in Kazakhstan to work on such reports, when we understand that after it, these companies will apply to be included for the inclusion to the IX listing. So that is all I want to say. Thank you very much. I hope that we have highlighted this is so you answered the question, your question. If you need any kind of additional information, please, you're welcome. We have a lot of questions now. Okay, I'll go one by one. Okay, one of the question is, I would like to know how the speakers see the international financial community respond to the mining and environmental reforms in Kazakhstan, in mining and environmental areas. I think this question to Oksana, maybe, or maybe a Kopo Malik, you also can comment on this question, please. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very good question. On the financing side, as a bank, we have the analysis of the environmental and social performance of our clients, and the recent changes in the legislation go into the direction of having the stronger controls and perhaps trying to aiming at improving some of the practices. So of course it will depend on the interpretation by each specific company of by the implementation by each specific company of the new changes to the law, but we believe that it could actually support the finance going into the mining sector in Kazakhstan, because we are getting closer maybe to some international standards and making it more familiar for the international banks which are present.
Thank you. Другие выступающие докладчики, Акоп, Малик, у вас есть что сказать по этому вопросу?
Would you like to add anything, Akop or Malik? Maybe I'm ready to answer the other question. I see a question here. This is a measures how to, to restore, to recover some of the Kazakh miners. I just want to understand the essence. Are we talking about recultivation or just about the recovery of some of the mines to bring it into the, initial state when they completed the mining activity? So I'm just wondering what was the question. So before we answer this question, let's finish with the previous one. Akop, as far as I remember, you have several
Victor, thank you so much. I mean, all those changes that we see in the mining sector and also environmental code, and then obviously they are welcomed by our financial community, including international stakeholders. So all the regulatory and legislative initiatives, they aim at making legislation more transparent and more clear, including for foreign investors. So, and we have already explained that subsoil legislation in Kazakhstan is quite advanced, as it based on the West Australian approach. And we've also mentioned that there's always room for improvement, and so quite a few things that needs to be also updated and improved so that Kazakhstan would compete more favorably with other countries in the region. And as for the environmental code, there's a newly adopted code and also laws regulating environmental matters. So in this respect, I would like to say that a good initiatives is implementing BAT and also EU standards. When I'm talking about, so I'm referring to environmental standards that again very favorably plays out in terms of investors' attitude and perception of Kazakhstan. So that's my brief reply to the question, colleagues, and we are pressed for time, and because we are supposed to have a break between the sessions, some of the questions we haven't covered, so we will be able to again to get replies a bit later, because we will send it to our speakers for comments. And our last question will be about transition to the green economy, because that is certain, obvious, and there's some loss of in revenues will just be visible, and probably so do Kazakh company are ready so to undertake that transition. So there's quite a lengthy questions, and I would like to ask all the panelists to share their views. So from me, so this transition is inevitable, so that's why we shouldn't ask about readiness, and it shouldn't be whether or not they're ready, but how. So in what way we could do it in say with less cost or expensive. I wouldn't say that all the companies would be ready to do it overnight. So I haven't seen it in none of the jurisdictions, and all the countries, companies and enterprises will have to adapt. They will have to change, and it's all about the regulatory framework and also the timeline that will be put forward to complete this transition. And now my question to you, distinguished panelists, would you like to comment on that question as well? So no further comments, and to your organizers, so these are several questions that we haven't covered, so I would like you to ask to send them over to other panelists, and I would like now to announce that we conclude this session so that you would have time during your break to get ready for the next session. I would like to thank all those joining us for this session, and also I would especially thank our panelists for very exciting and insightful presentations and cases that you shared with us. And I believe so that it has been informative, and they will be used to the benefit of all the companies in Kazakhstan in the mining sector. Thank you so much, and have a good day.